All right, good evening everyone. Welcome to the Gail Appel lecture series in Literature and Fine Arts. I'm Andrew Denton, the new director of the School for the Arts at the University of Saskatchewan's College of Arts and Science. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are gathered here on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. We are currently in a week of reflection leading up to Canada's National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It is particularly important this week that we give thought to our collective responsibility for decolonisation and reconciliation. Tonight is the 2024 event in the University of Saskatchewan's premier series of fine arts and literary talks. The Gail Appel Lecture is a hallmark event for the College of Arts and Science. This year's lecture is also the first public event hosted by the School for the Arts, the new School for the Arts. We are a new academic unit established in the college this summer. My family and I arrived here in July from New Zealand, and we now move here and live here. So, it is also going to be the unified home for the disciplines of drama, art, and art history and music. After tonight's lecture with the most wonderful Anne Bogart, who I've just met, welcome. We are so honored to host you here at the University of Saskatchewan. There will be a Q&A followed by a reception. The School for the Arts faculty members and I look forward to meeting with all of you at the conclusion of tonight's talk. The Gail Appel Lecture Series in Literature and Fine Arts was established in 2002 through a visionary donation by Gail Appel and her husband Mark. For more than 2 decades, this series has given our students and community members the chance to hear from some of the world's most distinguished and prominent artists. I want to thank Gail and Mark Appel. This event is only possible because of you. Events like the Gail Appel Lecture Series hosted here underscore the mission-critical importance of the fine and performing arts to the University of Saskatchewan and Saskatoon. Anyone who has visited or lives here knows that the city literally heaves with art and cultural events and talent. The turnout tonight reflects this value, so thank you and welcome to everyone. Tonight, we are privileged to welcome one of the world's most influential voices in contemporary theatre and opera. I would now like to invite up Ken McKenzie, Chair of the Gail Appel Lecture Series, to introduce tonight's speaker, Anne Bogart.
Hello, and thank you, Andrew. And I want to thank everybody, actually, who was involved in putting this event together. Thank you. So I'm going to introduce our guest today by way of a couple of short anecdotes. I was first introduced to the works of Anne Bogart by a dear friend of mine from Saratoga Springs in upstate New York. He was a really radical practitioner of theater, and more than anybody I know, he kind of embodied a sort of a punk attitude that breathed life and insight into numerous classic texts, ones that would otherwise seem dull and dry. He claimed that the work of Anne Bogart and the City Company were his greatest influence. Later, someone I consider a significant mentor introduced me to Anne Bogart and Tina Landau's viewpoints, which, while working with an ensemble, it seemed like a kind of a magical methodology for creating vocabulary and all of this engaging stage imagery. Then, just a few months ago, I was speaking with another friend and collaborator who claims that everything that she knows about directing is rooted in Anne's books A Director Prepares and her collection of interviews with other theatrical luminaries called Conversations with Anne. And even just last week, when I was speaking with a choreographer that I'm working with, I explained that I was preparing for this very lecture series, and she said, "Oh, I know Anne. I went and I studied with her for a few years ago in New York. She has the most amazing ability to put words to complex ideas and to make them so accessible." And then she proceeded to remind me of all of the other people that we know who have learned from Anne Bogart, either from her prolific catalog of books and essays, from the international influence of her company that she co-founded, the City Company, or from her position as the head of the graduate directing concentration at Columbia University. Anne Bogart has been an influence, if not directly, then always indirectly, on so many of the performance practitioners I know and I love and admire. And my tenuous connections are not at all unique, because the influence of our guest is profoundly widespread. On the long line of mentorship and influence from which we all descend, she is an alpha to so many omegas. I'm thrilled to have her with us here this evening. Please welcome the 2024 Gail Appel Lecture guest, Anne Bogart.
Thank you, Ken and Andrew, for this, the words and the welcome, and for your welcome. I'm honored to be here as part of the Gail Appel lecture series. I'm going to be a little bit annoying because I'm a director, and most directors are annoying, right? Always telling people what to do. It would be so lovely if we could be closer. Anybody? Come on down. Let's make a family. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And maybe we'll just feel better. Yeah. A lot of reserved seats of people who didn't come. Take their seats. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, great. Is this better? Do we feel better? Good. I'm happy to meet you and to also be here in Saskatoon, where I've never been. I arrived at midnight last night and have been soaking it in. So good weather's great. And so I don't know if you feel the way I do, and I'd be curious to know if you agree with me that we're living through a time where I find it necessary to rethink everything. I see some nods. Do you feel it here in Saskatoon in such yes. So in that spirit, I just want to share some thinking, because I don't think we can quite go on the way we have. And perhaps that's also our job in the theater, is to offer a certain amount of resistance, the kind of resistance that makes pearls, to make something beautiful and exquisite. So in that spirit, you have the best tattoos on your legs. Really good. There's an artist at work there. In that spirit, I've made a little collection of thoughts under the title of What Are We Doing? Right? What are we doing? So that's the title of this lecture. Maybe lecture isn't a good word. I don't know what the etymology of lecture is. Does anybody? Where's that word come from? To read, isn't it? Lecture. Anybody know Latin? Anyway. Moving right along. So I have some notes about things I want to discuss, and I'm going to share with you first I came up with seven points about what we might be doing, and I'd like to speak about each one. So don't worry, I'll repeat everything I'm about to say. So I asked myself, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing when we walk into a rehearsal room? What are we doing when we get a group of people together? What are we doing when we choose a play? That sort of thing. So I have 7 points. 1, we're creating model societies. There's 7. 2, we're robbing the graveyard. 3, we are creating memory and resonance. 4, We're creating opportunities for connection with the audience. 5, we're incorporating the other. 6, we are attempting the impossible. And lastly, 7, we're creating the circumstances in which something might occur or happen. So I just want to meditate a little bit on each of those points, and I hope that in our Q&A section we can maybe take some of them apart if anything provokes thought or reflection in you. It would be interesting to me to share those reflections. So the first one is we're creating model societies. So you have to ask yourself, what is it that we're doing that is distinct from any other art form? And what I would suggest is that the one thing that distinguishes the theater from any other art form is it is asking a very particular question, which, say, the visual arts aren't, or dance is not, or architecture is not. They each are asking different questions. And our question is, how can we get along better? Who are we together? And if you look at it, if you think of every play that has any weight or gravitas, it's always about a screwed up social system that is trying to rebalance from a state of imbalance. So you have this guy who kills his father and sleeps with his mother, and Thebes is a mess. and it's an attempt to create balance from a state of imbalance, an almost impossible task. Or if you think of Death of a Salesman, a great play, it's a screwed up family that's attempting to find grace and balance from a state of intense imbalance and strife. And so these plays are asking, how are we getting along? How can we get along better? It's about social systems. And I would like to propose to you a rather radical idea, which is, not only are we asking in the play, which is a fiction, but in the making of the play and in the experiencing of the play. For example, for those of you, please forgive me if I boss people around, but if you're in the theater, would you raise your hand if you're, oh gosh, my people. So a question is, can you hide a bad rehearsal in performance? I've had one experience where you could. If you want to hear about it later, I can tell you. Really bad, but it turned out well. But mostly, I think it turned out well because actually the two ensembles involved were in love with each other. So there was a lot of, the process was hard. I can name names later. But, so what the radical idea I want to propose to you is that when you go to see a play, you see it you experience it on two different levels of human perception. The prefrontal cortex experiences the play. You come out after the play, you say, oh, I just saw a play. It was about a guy who kills his father, sleeps with his mothers, and Thebes is a mess. And that's great. So that's one. But on a much more ancient part of the brain and the perception, the embodied perception, there's something else which the audience is learning about, which is, how did the actors get along? Have you ever been in a performance where sometimes somebody drops a glass and it breaks and nobody knows how to deal with it? Guaranteed it was a bad rehearsal process. But if you're in a performance and that happens, it becomes like lemonade. You know, you make what out of it? You make lemon. You make yeah. So that not only is this play being performed, but a proposal about how people can be together differently is also being shared. Now, I'll give you an example. In 1922 and 23, Stanislavski, who was then had started the Moscow Art Theater, brought his company, so this is post-revolutionary Russia, brought his theater company to the States because they were out of money, and they toured. They toured productions of Chekhov and Gorky around around North America, and because they were broke. And in New York, which is where I live, a lot of young people in their 20s went to see these productions, and they were blown away. And they begged people from the Russian company, the Moscow Art Theater, to some of the actors to stay and teach them how to do what they were seeing on the stage. And some very famous ones stayed, like Boleslavsky. Various members of the company stayed. I think life was better in New York, perhaps, than in Russia at that time. So I used to think that what blew away these young people, whose names were like, I don't know, Lee Strasberg, Harold Klerman, Stella Adler, you see where I'm going, who these people became. I used to think it was the acting, that it was the technique that blew them away. But what I'd like to propose is that it wasn't the acting technique, is they had never seen people be together like that on the stage. They had never seen, sweet. They had never seen that sort of interaction, because up till then, certainly in North America, as we have imitated the UK a lot, yeah, we know that, is that the productions were usually stars with backups, right? Featured headliners with backups. This was a different kind of being. Now, what I want to propose to you is that Stanislavski, who was at the time, they were performing older productions from like 1912 or 10 or something like that they were resurrecting to make money. But at the time, Stanislavski was studying the world, which is the job of artists, is to be curious and study the world. What was happening at that time, around 1915, a little before, and what were his influences? Well, I would propose that the influences were like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, Eisenstein's theories of montage, Freud's discovery of the unconscious, Picasso and Braque, creation of cubism, right? You see an explosion. The idea of special relativity leading to quantum physics. Now, with all of these huge explosions in psychology, in science, in art, the theater has to ask the question, how can we change in our social systems that reflect these new discoveries in science and math? And you see what I'm saying? And so what I want to propose is that this social system they were seeing on the stage, the way these people were being together, was new and novel and different and inspiring to these young theater people. And they wanted to learn how to do that. How can we be that way? So do you see what I'm saying? That in a sense, when you go into rehearsal, I'm a big believer of something I like to call, it's not an original thought, revolutions in small rooms. We go into a room together and we try to create a model social system, which is then reflected on the stage and is contagious to the greater world. And that not only is the question of the theater, how are we getting along, how can we get along better, not only for the actors, but for the audience. I hate to quote David Mamet because I hate him, but but he says some really smart things. He said, the audience always learns from one another how to watch a play. Amazing. But not only how is the audience getting along, how are the actors and the audience getting along? That this is the question that's resonant in the room as the theater production's going on. And it leads towards a kind of leaning into as opposed to leaning back, which is what the theater asks for. I don't know about you, but when I go to see movies, I love going to movies. I love to sit back, eat popcorn, whatever it is, and take it in. But in the theater, I want to lean forward, Why is it that it's so wonderful when you go to see a movie and it's empty movie theater? It's like, yeah, spread out. You go to the theater to see a play and it's empty and it feels horrible. Like you need that pressure of a community that is learning from each other, that is asking these questions. So do you see what I mean? It's a fictional question that we're asking, but also actually an actual one. which means that we in the theater are responsible for creating nothing less than a model society in the rehearsal room, which begs the question, how do you treat each other? And I'll get to this later, how do you create the circumstances in which something might occur? I'm getting lost in the very first question. Oh, that's okay, we're good. The audience is seeing double. The actors are modeling an ideal community. There's also in our field the potential of practicing what I like to call, again, not an original thought, intentional civics. What is that? It's about paying attention to the space between people rather than the people themselves, which is a whole different awareness. If we go through the world and pay attention to the space between us, which is different than saying you, certainly I think it affects the theater. Okay, number 2. We are robbing the graveyard. That sounds kind of morbid, doesn't it? No? I do think that if the theater were a verb, I would say it would be to remember or to remember, to put the parts back together again. And there's so much emphasis, certainly on young theater people, to make a signature, be innovative, create the future. But in fact, our job is to listen to the past, to find the voices that never finished their sentences, people who've died and haven't finished what they needed to say, is to, in a sense, be curious and embody the past and keep it alive, and to put these parts back together again, allowing dead people to speak. I know, it's a little morbid, through us. But, in going back to Heisenberg, it's the notion of standing on the shoulders of giants, that we choose to stand on their shoulders. And so we choose which shoulders we want to stand on. I do that personally by making plays about those people who I want to devour or to take in and create something about them. And it's... there's something that my favorite director, Ariane Mouchkine, who has a company in Paris called Le Théâtre du Soleil, not to be confused with the Cirque du Soleil in Las Vegas. It's a very international company. And she says to her actors before every show something so beautiful. You ready? This is good. She says, every performance, she says, tonight, there's somebody in the audience for whom this will be the first performance of their life, and there's going to be somebody in the audience for whom it's the last. Go on stage. Kind of amazing, right? Yeah. All right, we've done the graveyard. We're going to move to number 3. We are creating memory and resonance. So I was liberated in studying neuroscience to discover that memory is actually a protein in the brain. It's actually a protein. And it's created through the heat of emotion. So if you have a very emotional response to something, you tend to remember it. And then each time you remember it, you access it through synaptic activity, which tends to change the memory, but we won't go into that. Kind of interesting. So I thought, when I discovered that, I thought, boy, that's an amazing profession we're in. We're in the job of creating little proteins in the audience's brain. That's pretty cool. And I thought, okay, that's our job, is to create these proteins. And then a dear friend of mine, a big Minnesotan named Leon Inglesrud, who's very big and has red hair and speaks fluent Japanese. He was a member of my company, he said, yeah, that's a good theory, but what about my mother? I said, what do you mean? My mother has Alzheimer's. What are you going to do for her? And I really had to think about that. That sort of stopped me in my tracks. If our job is to create memory, what about somebody who has trouble with memory? So I had to think about that, and I started thinking about my own experience reading. I love to read, but the problem is, 2 weeks later, I have not only forgotten what's in the book, but I've forgotten the title of the book. Yeah, I'm seeing some nods, other people like me. And so thinking about that, I thought, well, but I love reading. I have such a strong experience while reading. And then I realized, well, actually, what's important is that while I'm reading the book, something resonates in me and changes me. I'm a different person from that experience. So I realized perhaps the theater is not so much about just memory, but about creating resonance. And resonance is literally the frisson de corps. It's the goosebumps that you get. It's the embodied response to something. And that our job in the theater is to do nothing less than create resonance between the audience and the stage, recognition, that circular pattern. My very favorite quote in the entire world that made me realize why I do theater is from, it was an interview I read with Alfred Brendel, the great Beethoven pianist who's known for his Beethoven sonatas. And in an interview, he described what he does when he's playing a Beethoven sonata. In concert, he's playing. He gets to the moment before the final chord. He lifts his hands and he asks the audience silently how long they'll let him wait before he plays the final chord. And when I read that, I had that reaction. I went, oh, that's it. That's why I'm in the theater. That's why I won't do film or television. That sacred relationship, which is human and has a great deal to do with resonance. And so going back to what the hell are we doing every time we go in rehearsal? Well, what are we doing? We're creating a model society. We're robbing the graveyard. And we're creating memory and resonance. That was 3. Number 4, we're creating opportunities for connection with the audience. So I'm a hippie. I went to Woodstock. That's how old I am, the original one. And I come out of a culture, is everybody okay if I swear? Yeah. My culture was, I've always been a director since I was in high school. My culture was, fuck the audience. That's what I thought. I said, we're doing our work, fuck them, The Germans are still doing that, but that's another story. Anyway, that started to change a little bit along the lines of the Alfred Brendel notion, that this thing that we have with the audience. And I read a book which everybody should read in the theater, and you probably have read it, called Oct7 by Calvin Hart, Lawrence Hart? No, what's his first name? Moss Hart, thank you, yeah. Moss Hart, and who did all of these sort of screwball comedies with the Calvin and Hart plays. And he describes in his memoir how they would go have out-of-town tryouts for their plays, say in Philadelphia or what have you, and they would watch these tryouts. They'd stand in the back. They would listen to the audience. They'd go home to their hotel suites afterwards, stay up late. They had suites in those days. And they would rewrite the play based on that circular nature. And when I first read that, I thought, damn them. And I got really jealous, actually. I thought, I've been ignoring a whole huge part of the experience of the sacred experience of the theater, which is that relationship, that timing. I remember actually doing a Kaufman and Hart play up at ART, that would be down and over from here, in Boston. And I was working with a wonderful actress who played the gossip columnist in Once in a Lifetime. And I came up for the final performance, and I asked her, she had done a lot of Broadway shows, and she's a comedic actress. I said, how's the show been? And she said, well, there's good audiences and there's bad audiences. And I said, what do you mean? She said, there's audiences who know how long to laugh, and other audiences who don't know how long to laugh, and they screw it up. So these little indicators get me thinking a great deal about that circular relationship, and I've gotten very interested in how an actor can change the breathing of an audience. And as a director, I'm the first audience, right? So the actor has to actually change my my breathing. I remember my friend, the actress Cherry Jones. She was working with this Broadway hack of a director who came up to her and said, she was doing a show on Broadway. He said to her, "Cherry, listen, don't let him laugh here, and don't let him laugh here. You get a bigger laugh here." I thought, I wish I could direct that way. That's beautiful, you know, creating the rhythm, the symphonic quality of going to the theater. What else do we have to say under this one? Oh yeah, so what is our relationship to the audience? And who are we speaking to? The now infamous Ivo van Hove, who's a great, he's not Dutch, although he worked he ran the big theater in Amsterdam. He's Flemish. Is he Flemish? Where is he from? Huh? He's Belgium, right. When he first came to New York, nobody knew he was Ivo van Hove, the great director. And I went to see a production that he did at New York Theater Workshop of More Stately Mansions, an impossible play by Eugene O'Neill, which is like 5 hours long and very, very wordy. And nobody knew this was Ivo van Hove. I went to a preview, and I came in, sat down with the audience, full house, small theater, full house. The actors come out on stage, they bow to each other, they bow to the audience. Then all of them but one, Joan McIntosh, go to the side of the stage and sit on folding chairs. Joan McIntosh inhales and starts to speak the first 8 pages of the play at top speed. I mean top speed. I found myself going, whoa, leaning forward. And then after about 3, maybe 4 minutes, I started hearing this strange sound. Flip, flip, flip. The chairs as people left. People were leaving in droves. They couldn't stand it. They couldn't stand being asked to listen that way. And after about 10 minutes, there was about a third of the audience that laughed, maybe more. The rest of us leaned in for that 5 hours, had an amazing experience, but afterwards, I was like, damn that guy. Like, how dare he do that to us? I thought, as a populist North American, I think, okay, be really sweet in the beginning and then hit him in the middle. But how could he do that, come in and hit you in the beginning, and then say, if you want to stay, this is what you have to do? And then I thought, well, subsidy. He's got subsidy. We don't have subsidy. He doesn't care. But then I had to think further, of course. And I started thinking about, who is our audience? Do we speak to a particular audience, which I used to think until then, or do we speak to a particular part of every audience? Do you see the difference? I used to say in my fuck the audience days, I'd say, oh, they have to make a pilgrimage to see my work, whatever. No, I'll find my own audience. Arrogance and elitist. But in fact, in the first 5 minutes of any production or less, the team is telling you what part of you have to be present for. And Ivo van Hove was saying to us as the audience, if you want to stay here, this is the way you have to listen. And I really started changing my attitude towards which part. So I just met Sam over there. How old are you, Sam? 13. Okay. So I'm very aware of, I'm trying to speak to one part of Sam, He's a guy who's like waking up to the world. You're looking at me very surprised. But how do I speak to Sam in a way that touches him, and also speak to somebody who's been around for decades, years and years? Where am I? We're on, we're creating opportunities for connection with the audience. Well, okay, I have to go into this a little bit. You all know about mirror neurons, right? Yes, no? Anybody not? It's interesting. Okay, I'm going to go there for a second. And when I describe scientific things, it's usually half inaccurate, but just you get the spirit. So I think it was in the 1980s that it was a group of Italian scientists who were working with rhesus monkeys or something like that. And the scientists went out to lunch when the monkeys were all hooked up with something. You know, what did they get hooked up with? Anyway, one of the scientists comes back and notices that this is going to sound like monkey see, monkey do, but when they would say a monkey eating a banana, there's another monkey who was watching them, and their neuronal activity was exactly the same. And so the theory came up, which people dispute, that there's something called mirror neurons, that we actually, when we're watching something, we are actually activating without doing the same neuronal activity as the person who's doing it. And then it got really interesting. I think in the early 2000s in London, there was a group of Royal Ballet dancers who were brought into to the study, and a group of capoeira chorus. And sure enough, if one ballet dancer watched another ballet dancer dance, and the one ballet dancer was hooked up with however they hook you up, exactly the same neuronal activity happened as the person who was watching it. Same thing with doing it. Same thing with the capoeira dancers. But when a capoeira dancer watched a ballet dancer dance, it didn't happen. There was no neuronal activity, which is very important for the theater, and I'll tell you why. Because if it's familiar, we imitate without doing. And it's all the more reason why in the theater, what's actually happening, because the theater imitates life, right? The behavior is somewhat similar to what we see in life, and yet it's heightened. It has to be clearer. If it's very clear what the audience is doing, they're not just sitting there watching, they are keeping themselves from doing what the actors are doing. A great actor will initiate the mirror neurons inside of the viewer, and the viewer is actually restraining themselves from imitation, not even knowing it. Don't you find that interesting in terms of what we're doing? Again, why in the cinema we sit back, it's not quite the same, but being in the presence of, so I had to bring up mirror neurons under this. Yeah. I'll just end with this one other anecdote. This is ending number 4, not ending the whole lecture, don't worry. There was a very famous puppeteer named Robert Anton who died tragically young from AIDS. And I was very fortunate to be in the audience for one of his productions. He only believed in 18 audience members. They would put them in a circle on stools. And the production I saw, he used finger puppets, tiny little finger puppets that had beautiful porcelain faces, like these extraordinary, you had to be close up to see them. And the one production I saw, we sat around this, like on a table, he had built a mountain with castles and roads and all, beautiful mountain scenery. And he started to perform this incredible production with his fingers and these porcelain puppets of great love and romance and really big story. 3/4 of the way, or maybe a little bit more, through the performance, he took the puppets off and performed a scene between 2 fingers, which was one of the most emotional scenes I've ever experienced in my life. Now, he couldn't have done that at the beginning. If he came out at the top and went, 2 fingers here, it would be really stupid. But he brought us to a point where we began to imagine into, to bring our imagination into it. Now, I know this because I was a young director. Young directors tend to do too much, put everything on the stage. But as you get older, you start learning, wait, what's the audience's job? What is the least I can do in order for the audience to take over that fiction making? And that only works in the theater. It doesn't, if you film two figures, it would be nothing. It would be, and so I've always been dedicated to doing theater that would look ridiculous on film or television. The theater that actually needs that language. I remember another example of that is when Peter Brook did Carmen, a chamberized version of Carmen. There was never any lighting change. It was a small ensemble, and the only lighting change was a blackout at the end, where Don Jose lifts his knife to kill Carmen, because that's what happens, and just on that moment, the lights went out for the first time. So again, this action went into the audience, and the audience imagined the rest, which is why I guess the Greeks have offstage action. Like, how could you stage anything interesting enough? All right, I'm on number 5, which is we are incorporating the other. So my colleague and great friend, who's a wonderful playwright, Chuck Mee, better known as Charles L. Mee Jr., who has all of his plays on the internet. You can take them, do whatever you want with them. That's his attitude. He told me something which I found really formative in my own development of this question of what are we doing. He said, the history of art is the history of inclusion. In other words, in the beginning, art was about the gods. And then it was about the gods and the demigods. And then it was about the gods and the demigods and the kings. And then it was about the gods and demigods and the kings and the aristocracy. And in each circle, the circle got wider and became more and more about other people. But if you look at the history of theater, also, the history of theater is the history of inclusion. That our job is to actually open ourselves to the other, the unincluded, and to include them in the drama, if you know what I mean. And this has become extraordinary. I mean, he once wanted me to do a play, which I did, called Another Person is a Foreign Country. Great title, right? And he had imagined there would be people who basically didn't usually get cast. This was in 1991, before it became a thing to do. And so he wrote the play for, there was a schizophrenic rock band, a blind choir, hermaphrodites, giants, deaf people, somebody with Down syndrome, and 2 little people, one that was this high and one that fit in the box. And we started casting. So we would go to the place with people with Down syndrome and find somebody who wanted to do this show. We ended up doing it in this big sort of rumble-down castle on 106th Street in Central Park West. It's now a condo for billionaires. Anyway, that's another story. And the producer, Annie Hember, had gone to the owners of this ruin, who was Ian Schrager and Paul Rudell, who owned. They were the people who did Studio 54, and they gave it to her for free as a producer. So we had the run of this place, and we indeed found a schizophrenic the rock band. We found Giant. We found all those people. We found a really fantastic little person, an actor, David Steinberg, fantastic actor, this high. And Equity, the Equity building really liked our project, so they let us have their studios for auditions for free, because they thought, good, you're casting people who don't usually get cast. Anyway, we found this wonderful young guy this high, and I said to Chuck, we've been auditioning for months now. We're never going to find a woman who fits in a box, who's supposed to be on a dining room table. And Chuck, who's usually the sweetest guy in the world, kept saying, no, we have to find her. No, it's very important for this play. One day, months later, in rolls on a wheelchair this woman this high, and she does a monologue. Yeah, it talks like this. I was blown away, and I said, Maria, I'd love to work with you, but you have to know that we're doing it outside, and you won't be in a wheelchair. You'll be in a box on a huge dining room table, and a giant will dance with you. And she said, oh yeah, that's fine. I live in New Jersey. When I need to get down the stairs, I just roll down. My boyfriend carries me back up. She turns out she had a truck that had been fitted out for her tiny arms. It was like a big brown van. And she would come bumping into the courtyard of this ruin every night. And we had, I think, the only sort of able-bodied actors were NYU undergrads, who I got to be sort of waiters in the show. And she would drive them all home at night. You know, she was bumping back out again. Why am I telling you this? Oh. And I remember, this was an extraordinary project, Another Person's a Foreign Country. I remember also one day coming for we got sold out, and Annie Hamburger, in all her wisdom, it was part of Harlem in those days, got the local kids to give out programs. We were sold out every night. We had to finally close when it was late October. It got too cold. I think we opened in early August or something like that. Oh, one more part. It's good. This is worth it. So the building is really beautiful. A brick ruin that had originally been the first cancer hospital in the United States that later became Sloan Kettering in another place. And then it was taken over, and I think it was like a sanatorium. And then some rabbi got people to locked in the basement and took their they took their checks. And one day, this is terrible. And one day, we were in rehearsal in the sort of open courtyard, and this little old lady walks in. She said, "Can I be in your play?" And I said, "You want to be in our play?" She said, "Yeah, I've walked by this building for years, and I used to see people." She told us that we used to see old people locked in the basement who were not taken care of. This building needs blessing. It needs to be cleared out. So I was working with the scenic designer, Kyle Japoulis, and I kept saying to Kyle, there's nothing to do except a big, huge table. This place is so beautiful. It needs to be lit beautifully. But we kept talking about water. Like, oh, we should have water, somehow water. Should we build? Well, there's not enough room for a little lake. Finally, he had the idea of taking PVC piping, running it up along a huge building, along the 6 sides of the building. The audience is in the courtyard. And then every night, 5 minutes before the end of the show, he would take this pipe and hook it up to water. What do you call it? A water, No, it's fire extinguisher. Hook it up. There were holes all along perforated along the building, and the building cried. It was the most beautiful effect I've ever seen in my life. And there's something very magical happen. I remember coming to the show one day. I got there really early at 5 o'clock, and 2 of the blind guys were standing across Central Park West, like standing there and swaying. And I went over, I said, "Guys, you're here like hours early, and you're on the wrong side of the street." And they said, "Yeah, we love being here so much." Something happened. It's that idea of, Chuck's idea of incorporation. And so going back to what are we doing, it's our job to say, what's the other, and to put it inside, and to ask, whose play is this? Who's it about? Who makes it? Whose stories are there? How do you tell those stories? Okay. How are we doing? I've got to go quickly. You know the musician David Byrne? He founder of the Talking Heads, yeah. He came to speak to Columbia students. I don't know, Jonathan, were you there when he came? No. He came to talk to his Columbia students for a graduation for School of the Arts. And he said 2 things which were massively important, although he mumbled, so I don't know that anybody heard them. I heard them. One thing he said is to the graduating artists, he said, "Choose yourself." That's great. Don't wait to be chosen. Choose yourself. The second thing is, he said, if you want to make a living in the arts, you have to cross discipline. In other words, the silos of which is why I think having what you're doing with the school here is really important, right? Silos don't work. You can't make a living. You can't make enough money to live. You have to cross disciplines. And that's another kind of incorporating the other. So I'll end that number with that one. What's number 6? We're attempting the impossible. Oh, that's a big one. All right. See if I can raccourci. So it's something that my somebody who I would call a colleague, but he's actually a generation older than me, a great Japanese director named Tadashi Suzuki, who I worked with. He helped form my company. He had this amazing. He has an amazing compound in the mountains of in the Japanese Alps of theater compound. And people come from all over the world. But something he said from the beginning is, international cultural exchange is impossible, therefore we must try. Which I think lies at the heart of what we're doing. That if we don't choose something impossible, we shrink. That we actually have to choose to do things you just barely think you can do. An actor needs to choose roles that they think they can barely do with no guarantees whatsoever. And that notion of doing the impossible is what actually dilates the human being, like an actor choosing to do something. I mean, the problem that we have, though, is that actors and directors tend to say, oh yeah, that character, I know what that character is. I mean, the worst thing you ever hear is, my character wouldn't do that. Oh, well, there's something worse is when they say, you'll see it on the night. I hate that one too. But if you are saying my character wouldn't do that, that means you have minimized your character into something smaller than you. Similarly, for a director, if a director says, I know how to do that play, I got it down, I got a concept. What's the point of doing it? That what we need to do is to stand. And these things are much bigger than we are, much wider, impossible to understand. I always think that something that Peter Sellers, the director, not the actor, said once. He said that when he's doing Shakespeare, he'll choose the speech that he doesn't understand the most and base the whole production on that. It's the speech that usually people cut, right? What is that? So that notion of the impossible. Oh my goodness. Truth is found in opposition. I can just say that, right? I don't need to tell a story. Okay. We have a choice. We have two options as human beings. We have a choice between conversation and war. That's it. Conversation and violence. That was actually said by Sam Harris. I didn't think of that. Much like... it's again, Chuck Mee told me this. If you think of a light bulb, and in the light bulb there's two filaments, right? The only reason we get light is because these two filaments are in opposition. And the opposition of these filaments creates this electricity that then, through the intensification of a globe, creates light. And in a sense, what are we doing is we actually have to create opposition in rehearsal. I don't know if it's true here in Canada, but there is something in the States which I call the disease of agreement. Yeah, it's here. Like, is our job to agree with one another? I like the German word Auseinandersetzung. Anybody speak German? Like, if you look it up, it says argument. But it's much more interesting than that. Auseinandersetzung, apart from each other, Setzung, to set yourself apart. In order to create, you don't agree, you set yourself apart. That doesn't mean argument at all. It means that you've created these two filaments, which is what will help us, if we can accept that, in our process of rehearsal. Yeah. Oh, good. We're almost at the Q&A. Hang on. I won't take this apart. While philosophy is about answers, the theater intends through questions to invoke both disruption and insight. It requires patience with confusion. I read a phrase in this really brilliant new book that just came out by Yuval Sharon called A New Philosophy of Opera, and he calls it ambiguity tolerance, like that is necessary. All right, the final, number 7, is we are creating the circumstances in which something might happen. You know, I think quite often we too often think, I'm going to go make this happen. I got this idea, I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to go in there and make it happen. Either directors, designers, artists, actors. Biggest mistake in the world. That's not to say that you don't need to really study and think and research and come up with 100 possibilities, but the minute you go in that room, rehearsal room, shut the door, that has no place. What you can do is create the circumstances in which something might occur amidst a group of people. For me, it's really dumb. It's like start on time, show respect, end on time, make sure the space is clean. Do you see what I'm saying? That you create circumstances where people feel respected by the conditions, and also the secret is that if you clear the space and somebody's left a sock up there, upstage, on the stage right, it should mean something. Do you see what I'm saying? Everything on stage starts to mean something if you start with a blank slate. But what I want to leave you with in terms of this part of the lecture is, again, nothing that I've said is original. I have only one original theory, which if you want to hear it someday, I'll tell you. But this is not original, but it's the 4 steps in the recipe to collaboration and creating the circumstances. You want to hear it? 4 parts. Number 1, show up. Number 2, pay attention. Number 3, tell the truth. Number 4, don't hang on to what you expect to happen. Number 1, show up. I'm here. Yeah, but did you really show up? I mean, did you really show up? Did you show up? Do you see the difference? Pay attention. I'm paying attention. Are you really paying attention? Really, really, really? Tell the truth. Tricky, right? Tricky when to tell the truth, how to tell the truth, how not to shut down the circumstances. Tell the truth. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, although I would say it's non-hierarchically all equally important, don't hang on to what you expect to happen. We come in with these expectations, let them go. And then somehow that can help create the conditions for something to occur that's, dare I use the word sacred, amidst people. So thank you very much. That's the end of the 7 parts.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. I think it's probably safe to say that you are fine with being in conversation with the group. And so I don't think we need to be exceedingly formal in the way that we do this Q&A. And I think there is a mic if you're worried about not being able to be heard. There's a mic at the center. But if you want to just raise your hand, I'm happy to repeat the question if it's a little.
There's one right over there.
Pardon me? Yeah. Yes. I can repeat the question if and maybe I'll do that just so that it's on the recording.
Okay,
Well, thank you for being the first.
I showed up.
You showed up.
So I wanted to take maybe a bit of I want to be one of the anode cathodes and ask a little bit about this, because for me the thing about that binary is the most important part is the space in between.
Yes.
It's absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
As well as the idea of a volume that holds that
Yeah.
space. And you started out by saying that the theater asks very specific questions that nobody else does, who are based in relationality. And I think that all art is actually a gesture outwards.
Yeah.
It's rooted engagement through the kinds of spaces we create and spaces between. So I don't see the distinction.
First of all, that was beautifully spoken, what you just said.
Thank you. I'm a teacher. But I'm just thinking, I'm curious about that suggestion that there's questions in the theater that are asked only there, as opposed to the distinct methodologies and ways of working that are always rooted in relation, and especially when you use such a beautiful illustration, even mirror neuron,
Yeah.
and thinking about sort of this explication of how it's rooted in relationality, and that all things are true. Like,
Yeah.
we understand through the mirror neuron that even auditory hallucination, the person that is not having shared experience still has that physical experience.
Yeah.
So what is the usefulness of suggesting there's a question somewhere that can only be handled there, as opposed to suggesting these questions have different methods of engagement, especially when we're talking about the School for the Arts. And we want to think about what are we doing for the arts? What are the conditions we are creating to engage in a much deeper relation that will bring that into very exciting synaptic, and synapses are spaces, right? And one of the things that happens in the sort of physiology you're describing is concretization. The proteins concretize those spaces. So what do we do to create the most elastic of spaces and decide when we want it to concretize into memory and these sort of threads we pull through? So these are much more commentaries, but I really did show up. And I really have been listening. And I really am listening to your stories. And I want to know about that need to create specific sites, or what are the methods of engagement we need to amplify for one another.
You know, you just threw down the gauntlet to this university.
And I just want to be clear, it's not war or conversation. There's such a difference between agonism and antagonism.
Yeah.
So I'd like us to get to the point where agonism is understood as necessary.
Yeah.
That friction is required.
Yeah.
It makes heat.
I agree. And agon for Sam, who doesn't know it probably, comes from the Greek, and it's when dialogue was invented. Like, people used to speak on their own, and then suddenly they were talking together. So agonism means people actually I like the notion of the etymology of conversation, which is conversation is to change places, in a sense, to turn with, vers, con. And it's something John Cage said, is that any conversation, in the end, you should have switched positions. You should be in the opposite direction. But we were talking before about how theater people naturally are used to collaborating. But in Andrew's situation of bringing all these different disciplines together, it's that question that you threw the gauntlet down, which is how can we communicate the dis-ease, the influenza, all those of communion. You know, how can we share that and think that communities are better in conversation, right? So I mean, there's no answer except that's the best question you could ask: is how can we get along better, all of us? I don't know if anybody else has a solution to it. Maybe Andrew, you have a solution? No.
Just creating the conditions.
Take care of the conditions, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the conditions this evening are beautiful, right? I came in and everything's getting set up, people arrive. There's a readiness to be in conversation. I just always think the more we're together, the better. I can't stand Zoom anymore, except for faculty meetings. I think that's great. But the dis-ease of cohabitation is key, that we learn how to be together and to maintain a separateness, not a disease of agreement, but to maintain a separateness, which you did by standing there and striking it down. That's all I have to say, but maybe somebody else has something to say. Striking it down meaning throw the gauntlet.
Yes?
What is your original theory?
Oh, you want to hear it? I do. I have to have a drink of water. It's truly the only, I have written 6 books, and there's only one theory that I came up with by myself. I think I'm a scavenger. Okay, I was for one wonderful and horrible year artistic director of a very large theater in Rhode Island called Trinity Rep, which is where I actually first saw theater when I was 15. It's another story. And so my job, but I was fired by the board after a year. Another story. But my job was to get people to buy, what's the word? Subscriptions. We don't even think about subscriptions anymore. It's a different way of buying tickets. Anyway, this was 1989. My job is to go and get people to buy subscriptions as artistic director. So I had to go to the Elks Club and go to the library and go to these places to give speeches and inspire people to buy season tickets to Trinity Rep. So then I had to ask myself, well, why do people need to go to the theater? Like, what human needs does a theater fulfill? And I came up with 7. And I realized that the great theater experiences that I have in my life, all 7 happened at the same time. This is amazing. Most theater experiences, maybe 1 or 2 would happen. These human needs were fulfilled. So shall I go through them? So, the one you probably expect, the human need to empathize, that we need to care about other people. Or, you put your money on a horse in a race. It's like, yes, 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 your horse is running fast. That's empathy, too. Or Hedda Gabler picks up the gun. Yeah. That's empathy. So we need to empathize with something that's outside of ourselves. That's one. Another one is the human need for spectacle. Like to see things larger than ourselves. Like, why do we watch the Macy's Day Parade every year? Or why do you want to watch a king's coronation? Is that we have a need to see things that are bigger than we are. Another one, which is the human need for entertainment. That song and dance. And if you think of like the most intellectual, great theater people. You think of Bertolt Brecht, he was a showman. Same thing with Samuel Beckett. He loved vaudeville, that there's a sense of showmanship. Another one is the human need for ritual. Or as Elias Canetti says in Crowds and Power, why do people go to church? Not to pray to God, but to stand, sit, and kneel simultaneously. That we have that need to do that. Another one which sounds close to ritual, but it's different, is the human need to participate. So I started thinking about this when I met a young person who was an intern at a Beethoven's 9th weekend in Purchase, New York. And I asked her job was to make 2,000 copies of the Ode to Joy chorus. And I asked her about it. She said, yeah, they had lectures on Beethoven. They had exhibitions on Beethoven. All of the people came and they were able to go to a rehearsal where the conductor would say, in this moment here, I'm calling on the strings for more. Anyway, she said that when the final concert came on the Sunday, that when that moment where the conductor is calling on the strings, the entire audience leaned forward. That's participation. It goes back to what I was saying. In the theater, we lean forward. In film, we might lean back, although some experiences you lean forward. How many have I done so far? 4, 5, 6? The human need for magic, which is the human need to see transformation in front of your eyes. Like, why do we, Ebenezer Scrooge transforms from a guy who's miser into a person who is generous and good. How many was that? That was 7? Oh, yeah, the human need for education. Like sometimes I go to the play just to learn about the kings of England, or the history of England, that we actually want to learn. So going back to my revelation is that the great productions I've seen in my life do all 7 at the same time. There's spectacle, there's empathy, there's entertainment, there's learning, there's participation, there's ritual, whatever else I said, magic. So there's your answer. That's my only theory. Thank you.
Jonathan.
Thank you for coming to Saskatoon. When I heard you were coming, I was very surprised. So that speaks to your character that you're willing to be with us. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you for saying that. It's my pleasure to be here, really.
Appreciate it. It's an honor to hear your thoughts. And more of a simple question, because you talked about what we're doing, and we just heard why we're doing it.
You're going to say how?
Well, no, I'm interested in who we're doing it for.
Yeah.
And you touched on it a little bit. And I was hopeful when you started the talk saying, if something, I'm going to paraphrase you saying, we can't keep doing it the way we were doing it before.
Yeah.
And we had this pandemic and change moment. We all thought things were going to change. And it seems like theater is still being made by and large the same way. Especially here in Canada, our original theaters, which are taxpayer funded, are doing it the same way.
Yep.
And so, not that you want to be an artistic director, but if you were to be in control.
I was for 30 years with my own company. It's over. I'm so happy. I'm sorry.
What pains me
Yeah.
is to still see theater being made for people already going to
Yeah.
theater in the way that it's always been done. We're not making theater for people who haven't been to
Yeah.
theater before, for the general public. There's a disconnect in how might you
Yeah.
solve that for the who, for the people that don't go to theater.
Yeah. I did consider making that my whole lecture tonight, but then I. But no, here, I'll start personally and then sort of go out into the world. I will say that Canadian theaters are still subsidized. In the States, not so much, and so they're falling apart really fast, which might be their salvation, maybe. But, so personally, I told you I was a hippie. I'm also part of postmodernism. And what we did as postmodernists is we tore down the sacred icons. Deconstruction. I deconstructed a lot of plays. What I found out a while back, and this is pre-COVID, I started thinking that we postmodernists have deconstructed to the point of no meaning. And that perhaps we've reached the end of deconstruction and we're entering into a new ism, a new we have reached the end of postmodernism, which is I'm a postmodernist kid, and we are looking for a new ism that might be, if I were going to call it today, I'd call it something like reconstructivism. I know that's got really bad history. I just take that back. Okay, reconstruction. No, not good. So there are pioneers who are thinking this way that you're describing. And I would say some of the earlier pioneers, well, they're much earlier, but more recent, are people like Anna Devere Smith, who interviews people and then embodies them on the stage. Or the civilians who do, like certainly Moises Kaufman and Tectonic Theater with the Laramie Project. There's a whole movement to ask, who are these plays about? But then the question becomes bigger, which is where you're getting at, which is how, if we come out of postmodernism where we've destroyed stories, we've destroyed them, they're all laying down on the ground. It used to be interesting. You pick up little bits and you look at them. We've lost our ability to tell stories. So the question now is, whose stories are there? Who makes them? Who are they for? And how do we tell them? And it's completely different. And there is, at least in the States, some movement in that direction. For example, Anthony, the best countertenor in the world, Anthony Costanza, who's this incredible countertenor, he was just made artistic director of Philadelphia Opera, and he announced as he came in $11 tickets for every seat, every performance, things like that. There are people who are starting to think differently, but it's going to take a much bigger move. I will say, many years ago, like I think it was in the late 90s, I went to it was a get-together, it was a junket held by the Duke Charitable Trust or the Mellon or something at this little castle in Tarrytown, New York, for all these artistic directors. And I went to, it was like a 2-day conference, and I was sitting in the room with, some of them are dead now, Gordon Davidson, who started the Taper Forum, Bob Falls, who recently retired from the Goodman, all dudes, Mark, the Hartford Stage, and they were sitting talking, and finally Gordon Davidson, the great father, he said, yeah, we should just blow up our theaters. I went, excuse me? He said, yeah, they're not working anymore. And the other artistic directors, yeah, so true. They say, well, yeah, that top-down thing is not working. So of course I said, well, what do you want to do? What could replace them if you're going to blow them up? Of course, none of them blew them up. They all kept their massive salaries. Anyway, but the answer was, and they all said it, they said, cells. What do you mean? We think these theaters should have cells, different companies who function in these buildings and are making work in a different place. That started to happen. I can't tell you the number of theaters that are suddenly being taken over in the States by 3-part leadership and led by mostly people of color. It's a huge change. And then these demands for tickets. So the problem is this thing which we all have in us, it's called habit. And we long for things to be stable. And yet, perhaps our vitality lies in the destruction of these, what was it? These shrines. I clearly don't have an answer for you.
Pretty good answer.
But that's why I didn't want to do a whole lecture, because I don't quite know yet. I'm just...
Please come back.
Okay. I'll have to formulate that lecture. Thank you for the question, though. Or what, it was another gauntlet, I would say, too.
Yes?
So, I want to pursue theater. Like, I'm a very young person, obviously. And I didn't even consider going into it until about like a year ago now. And I feel like it's just kind of spiraled down.
Yeah.
But one thing I found I've struggled with, and a lot of other people I know that I've struggled with, is how to navigate our relationship with the stuff we've created, with our creativity, with our performances. Like, how do we navigate that relationship?
I actually have an answer for that. But I do want to ask you first, what was it that made you decide to take this new direction?
It's a program called Circle of Voices over at Jesus Theater.
And what is that?
It's basically just like a theater group that meets up every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 5 to 9.
Yeah.
And we just, at first we did a lot of theater games.
Yeah.
We got used to the space.
Yeah.
But then in February this year, we started a production called Mystic Open Forward. And that's what kind of made me spiral.
But something in you was stirred by it, right? Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to do a slightly long answer and go back to a theory that's not mine, and then come to exactly your situation, which is, have you read, there's a book that was originally entitled The Gift, the Erotic Life of Property. Now you're going to ask me who wrote it. It now is just called The Gift. Jonathan, do you remember? No. Anyway, the theory in this book is that we as human beings function out of 2 impulses. One is a survival instinct, and the other is the gift-giving instinct. And the way we make decisions from each is radically different. So, for example, if you're worried about your career, or you're worried about putting a roof over your home and taking care of your kids, if you're worried about your career in the biz, the decisions you made and need to be made are made from this instinct of survival. You got to be really smart. You got to think fast. You got to really make plans. Then there's this other thing called the gift-giving instinct. And I'll give you an example. It's a really dumb one, which is like, say it's your birthday, and say your friends have gathered in your house, and you're going to arrive soon. And we're in the house, in the living room, going, okay, this is what's going to happen. We're going to turn the lights out. We're all going to hide behind the couch. And okay, when she knocks, let the door open, count to 3, and then Surprise! Okay. Where are those decisions coming from? Giving a gift to somebody. Similarly is when you're working on a play. I would give an example. In my company, we used to have in Midtown, we had a rehearsal studio and we had administrative offices right next with a little hallway in between. And I'll be in the rehearsal studio and we're working on something. This is a fictional idea, but our executive director comes in and goes, "Ann, this play you're working on, we need an earlier intermission." I'm going, "Oh, no, because it's going to be like this, and then the lights are going to go like this, and then the audience is going to..." And she's going, "Ann, we're not going to sell tickets if you don't have..." Do you see what I'm getting at? Two different impulses. We need each other. We need both of each other. And as a matter of fact, an administrator has an artistic side, has a creative gift-giving side, and each of us in our lives have to take care of those two impulses. We have to be smart when it comes to survival choices, and then we have to take care of that tender thing called gift-giving. Now, so you're moving, you're like your producer and your artist in one body, and you have to take care of that. As a company, as a artistic side and administrative, they go back and forth. So, getting to the personal is that you're living your life, and you encounter this group of people. So what happens with you? I like to call it, using that word before, frisson de coeur, or goosebumps. Is you get goosebumps. You go, it's like your body is a barometer. The only way to move through life as an artist is to pay attention to your body. Is that when you get those goosebumps, you got to go there. You've got to move in that direction. You have to give everything else up. The minute you don't, and you go, I really felt for that, but I really planned to do this, you die as an artist. Seriously. So you have this huge responsibility to stay sensitive to the barometer of your experience. And as long as you stay that, it's going to take you on an amazing journey. You have no idea what you're going to experience. You're going to experience different people in different lands and different things and different experiences, all kinds of things. But the minute you betray the frisson de coeur, or the goosebumps, you've lost yourself. You've lost your artistic integrity. Yeah? Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yes, okay.
I think we have time for maybe one more question, if there's one out there. Then Joe?
Again, thank you. I'm sure all of us are feeling really grateful to be here. And for context, COV is one of the most important Indigenous youth programs in the country.
I'm happy to know about that. That's great. Yeah, thank you.
So for me, like, early in my career, I'm not that old yet, I hope. You're writing about making art in a time of crisis was really formative, really important. And I think we might be able to acknowledge that since then it's been unmoderated crisis after crisis after
Wait,
crisis.
what has? What?
We've continued to have crises
Yes.
gone forward.
Yes.
An accelerated rate. Maybe.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, I would propose that we're in a different sort of crisis in this moment politically than we have been ever. Our country is not much different than yours in terms of politics right now. And so I'm curious, your thoughts about making art in a time of crisis, but maybe what has changed or what is changing and what that means for us.
I think we're at a point of dancing on the volcano. I think there's things that need to die. And support given to that which needs support, And so to identify that, and it seems in this room from the voices I'm hearing of telling the truth, of show up, pay attention, tell the truth. That telling the truth is a heroic act. I don't know about in Canada, but in the States, there's a disease that is, I think, political. I keep using that word disease, influenza, of not finishing your sentence. I think there's reasons why people have been encouraged not to be able to speak properly or to have a point of view. It's in the education, it's in the world of politics, and I think we have to fight that with every fiber of our being and to speak mistakes. You know, the secret to being an artist, you want to know what that is? And it relates to your question. Well, actually, I'm going to quote Picasso to begin with. Picasso said, "The first stroke on a canvas is always a mistake. And the rest of the work on that canvas is to fix that mistake." So the reason we, either as artists or activists or influencers in the world, we don't act is because we're afraid we don't know what the fuck we're doing. None of us know what we're doing. And so what we do is we get really fuzzy because we don't know what we're doing. If you can take a deep breath and speak the truth or lay down the gauntlet, it's going to be a mistake. And then you have to scramble. Can we live in what feels intolerable of doubt and cultivate the necessary courage to make the changes that are necessary? And I do think that, I already said it, that certain things need to go away, that are outdated and are only kept because they give us some sense of stability. So does that start to address what you're bringing up? Sure. Kinda, sorta? Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. This is not the end of the evening, and in fact, in this spirit of being in conversation with one another, this is where the reception begins.
Where's that?
Well, it's right here in this room. You don't have to go very far to be a part of the conversation here, so I would actually suggest that all of you stick around. Engage in more of this conversation. I think that there are a lot of interesting things to be talked about. I do want to thank, everybody for coming here. I want to make sure to thank Gail and Mark Appel for making this event possible. I want to thank the members of the committee that helped make this event and all of the people who helped make this event possible, so thank you. And with that, I want to thank especially Anne for being here. So if we could all give Anne a round of applause.
Thank you.